Is it better to forge your own path in magic and witchcraft, or is it better to follow a tradition? All right, there are various advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. So today I'm going to have a look at that, or some of them anyway. And if you do like my content, then please like and subscribe and share and comment, and it would be most appreciated. Welcome to my channel. You are entering the world of magic and mysticism with your host, Lee W. Johnson. Keep the lights on and help improve the channel by becoming a supporter for just $2.99 per month. Hit the join button. Okay, so following your own path or following a tradition. Now, if you are going to be following a tradition, then you are going to find that things are going to go a lot quicker, as opposed to following your own path or forging your own path. When you are forging your own path, there's a lot of learning curve. There's a lot of things you have to study, you have to learn, and you have to do it by yourself. And that requires a lot of study, experimentation, and a lot of work, all right, to actually find what works. If you are, however, following a tradition which has a very solid foundation, which has a very solid base, then the work's already been done for you. So what you're doing is you're then following the instruction of other people. Now, the problem here comes in that you could fall into the trap of being taught a particular way of doing things and then sort of fixing yourself in that way, instead of learning that and then extending from it and expanding your own path, your own self. A lot of people will follow tradition, and that's what they do. A lot of people do prefer structure. Some people don't. So it again comes back to a personal thing. If you are somebody who does like structure, then following a tradition is probably better for you. If you are somebody who is very comfortable with not following structure, then forging your own path and doing all of that study, doing all of that work could be a lot more advantageous for you. But as I said, when you're following a tradition, you are basically given a set of instructions, and you follow those instructions in order to develop yourself. And those instructions have most likely been based in practice which other people have done. And I'll say other people, depending on the tradition, obviously, but it most likely will result in the fact that there are hundreds and thousands of people who have done this before you. So they have worked out the problems, they have worked out the kinks, they have worked out a proper way of getting you from point A to point B. And then all you do is follow that structure, follow those examples, follow those lessons, teachings, etc., etc. And this can speed up the process. But what you might find is that you follow that and you get stuck in it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're comfortable with that, then that's fine. That's absolutely perfectly fine. But if you do want to grow and expand, then you would have to follow the tradition, get to point B, and then break away and start forging your own path, or go on to a different tradition. But during this process of getting from point A to point B, you are going to want to follow the tradition word for word. At that point, you cannot break away from it. You cannot start altering things within that tradition, within those teachings, because in order to get from point A to point B, you need to follow the instructions that are given to you. If you take an instruction and you start changing it to something else, then you start diverting. So you're going to end up going from point A to this and 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 all the way back again and back again, forward and back and forward and back. And you might do, but you might not get to point B. If, however, you are forging your own path, to get from point A to point B just takes a longer process. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be putting in the work, you're going to be doing the experimentation, you are going to be finding out what works and what doesn't work by yourself, for yourself. And although the process, I mean, if we were to put it in a time, there's no real timeline for this, but just as a comparison, as an example, if it takes you a year to get from point A to point B, if you're following a tradition, then forging your own path may take 5 years, 10 years maybe. Okay, so it's going to be a much longer process. However, forging your own path can bring a lot more rewards. Following a tradition, you are simply, as I said, following instructions, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, etc. Forging your own path, you are doing all of that experimentation, you are putting in a lot of work, and that brings a lot of rewards. So, really the question of should you follow a tradition or should you forge your own path, should you find your own way, there's no simple answer to it, as so many things within witchcraft and magic. There's just no simple answer for a lot of these things, and it all boils down to personal preference. But what you'll find is that it actually works in both circumstances when it comes to the people who have gone before you. So if you're following a tradition, there are people who have gone before you, they have done the work and they have found what works, and they can then give it to other people, give it to you, for instance. And with that brings a lot of power. If you're forging your own path, there are still people who have done that work before you, because what you'll be doing is reading books. You may be speaking to various people. But you will be doing things which people have done before you. But there's no set of instructions. There's no step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. What you're doing is you are kind of trying something, and which hundreds of people have done before you and have found success with it, but it may not fit with something else that you're trying to do. So then you have to adjust, you have to adapt, you have to change, you have to find something which actually does work and does mold or combine with that other practice. And that is where things take a lot of time. But as I said, at the same time, it brings a lot of reward. And you are not being taught things which could possibly be wrong. And when I say wrong, it may just be one idea here and one idea there compared to the entire expanse of the actual teaching itself. But you're going to be taught that, and then when you get challenged on that, you kind of aren't open to the idea or the possibility that you can expand your knowledge, and not everything that you were taught may be correct. And at the same time, there are different viewpoints, there are different ways to look at different things, different principles, different ideas. So even though you may end up being challenged, it doesn't mean that that thing is necessarily wrong. It just means that you need to expand your knowledge on it. And quite often what happens is when you follow a tradition, you kind of get fixed into that tradition, and when you get challenged on a particular concept, you don't want that challenged, because challenging your own worldview is painful. It is very difficult, but it's necessary to grow and expand. So you have to bear that in mind. So my own personal approach, I did not follow any specific tradition or teaching which took me from that point A to point B. I was the person who forged my own path, who did all the work for the past almost 30 years now. That's what I've been doing. I have had various teachers over the years, and those teachers have sometimes been direct, like when I was learning Kabbalah with Jacobus, but at the same time, that wasn't putting me into a tradition. That was a very, I'm going to say, open type of teaching. It wasn't follow step 1, then step 2, step 3, and putting me into a tradition that was very structured. It was a very loose teaching, and so when I wanted to learn a particular thing, he would be there and he would say, do this practice or do that practice. But it wasn't this rigid traditional teaching or pathwork, or path actually into the tradition itself. So my whole practice has been that forging my own path, and it's taken me a long time to get where I am. But at the same time, I am not fixed to any beliefs or ideas. I constantly change my own beliefs and ideas, because if you are forging your own path, that's something you're going to have to do, is constantly change, constantly challenge yourself and allow yourself to be challenged. If you do not allow that challenging, then you are not going to expand and grow, because you may hold a concept, an idea for 10 years, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and says something which is slightly contradictory, and because you've held this belief or idea for 10 years, you do get kind of married to it. You know, it becomes your little brainchild, and you don't want to let that go. But in order to let it go, in order for it to actually grow, you do need to let it go. So, you know, when that thing comes along that challenges that idea, you kind of have to let it go and explore these other ideas and see if you can expand on that idea that you've had for the past 10 years. But I think forging your path makes that a lot easier to accept, and therefore it becomes more rewarding. Right, so if you are, you know, opposed to that, if you are going to follow a tradition, it's very good to do. You're going to progress a lot faster. But what you need to bear in mind is, firstly, try and make sure that you don't get fixed in the ideas, fixed in the teachings. So while you are in the tradition, while you're learning to get from that point A to point B, you need to follow it word for word, so that you can learn all that is to be learned. And then once you've done that, then you can step outside the borders, and then you can start expanding, changing, adapting. But you can't do that while you're in that learning process. It's not going to help you at all. In fact, it will set you back. So when you are learning to get from point A to point B within a tradition, make sure that you stick to the teachings itself and do not divert from them. Does not mean that you cannot go and explore other ideas, but pertaining to that particular tradition and that particular teaching, you need to stick to it word for word. And as I said, if you've got more time, you can go and explore other ideas and ideologies and worldviews and perspectives, which can then build onto what you're actually doing. But you have to stay within that tradition, within those teachings, and learn everything word for word, so that when you get to point B, you know that tradition inside out. It becomes a part of you. But then when you get to the end of it, you can either stick with it, you can continue with that structure, or you can step out of those boundaries and you can start exploring other things and expanding. But at the same time, if you do stay within the tradition and you stick with it for the rest of your life, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I support it completely. But do understand that some of the ideas within that tradition can be challenged, because all viewpoints and perspectives are not the same, and worldviews differ so much that somebody could come along and challenge an idea that you have within your tradition. It doesn't mean they're wrong, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that you can expand on that idea. And even if you expand on it and you understand it from different perspectives, it doesn't mean you have to accept all of those perspectives. You can still stick with what you understand that idea to be. but you have learned more, you have grown, you have expanded. Okay, so it really is all about growing and expansion. And if you stop growing and expanding, then you are going to become stagnant, and you're going to stick with that one tradition. Again, nothing wrong with that if that's what makes you happy. Me personally, I prefer to grow, and that's what I try and bring across in these videos is growth. Don't stop learning, never ever stop learning, never ever stop growing. There's so much to learn, there's so much to know, there's so much to discover out there. One lifetime isn't nearly enough to do it all, but doesn't mean you can't try. So keep going forward, keep growing, keep expanding, and never stop learning. That's really what it boils down to, and the approach you take to that is going to differ from person to person, depending on personality, depending on personal preferences. As I said at the beginning, if you like structure, tradition is great for you. If you don't like structure, then exploring all of these things yourself and learning yourself and doing all of that work and experimentation, it's fantastic, it's wonderful, and it is rewarding. Both are rewarding at the end of the day, but I think finding your own way is kind of more rewarding, if I can say that. I'm sure some will disagree with me, but if you've put all of that work in by yourself, and you've come to the mysteries, and you've come to discover all these things by yourself, it's just wonderful. At the same time, if you are following all of those teachings and you come to those mysteries through the teachings of other people, also rewarding. And it may be more rewarding for some people doing it that way than it is forging your own path. So again, personality, personal preferences. So you have to find the thing or the way that works best for you. All right. So that's it for today, and I will see you on Wednesday for Ask Lee. Have a good one until then. Bye bye.